Now that's significant. The Market Research Podcast.
Experience, wisdom, learnings. These are all something you acquire the moment after you really need them. We all go through life and make certain decisions that, in hindsight, we wish we could have made differently. But not all consequences are bad, especially if we do something differently when faced with a similar situation in the future. Hi everyone, thanks for joining us on this latest episode of Now That's Significant, a market research podcast. This is your host, Michael Howard, the head of marketing at Infotools. Today, we're joined by Stefanie Zammit, Director, Analytics and Insights at Bang Olufsen. Stefanie has an envious career path, which includes one of the top audio brands in the world, Starbucks, Marks and Spencer, and The Times, as well as stints on agency side like Ipsos and Quadrangle Research Group. Thanks for joining us on the show, Stefanie.
Yeah, thanks. It's great to be here.
You're welcome. Now, Stefanie, I'd like to kick off this episode with a bit of background, perhaps how you came to join us on the show today.
So I am in a new role and I have new job energy. And one of the things I think that I had become quite complacent about in recent years is being more engaged with the industry outside of the day job. And I think the more seniority you gain client side, the more risk there is of being disconnected because you become so busy and, the focus of your role shifts from the doing to the leading. And so with this particular job, I wanted to make a conscious effort to find ways to be more connected to the industry. And just through LinkedIn sleuthing, which I do a lot of, I came across the list of podcasts, which I didn't even know there was a list of Insight podcasts. And that was already exciting. And in the spirit of being more involved, I reached out and said, well, if you want anyone to chat with, happy to support a podcast and just happy to learn that they even exist.
And so on that point, do you think it's just client-side senior professionals, or do you think is an element of that as well with the younger, those younger or earlier on in their careers as well that are client-side?
That's, it's a good question. And it's a difficult one to answer because I think it depends where you are client side. Some brands are so intense. It is extremely full on. And ultimately the answer just depends on how much disposable time you have and maybe how disciplined you are in protecting time for things like this, because it is ultimately a type of personal development or professional development. I think when I was younger and I was client side, I was more able to say yes to all the event invitations and conference invitations. I feel I had more bandwidth, even though it's always a busy industry. I think as I've gained seniority, to say yes to those types of events, the things that you have to say no to are kind of more difficult to say no to, because it would be, board meetings and C-suite level meetings that you would have to turn down to go to these events. And it's just harder to do so. I think also when you're earlier on in your career, if you have a leader, especially a leader from an insights background, if you're fortunate enough to report into an insights leader, which not all people will, I think they might be more understanding of the importance of prioritizing those types of events. And again, as you gain seniority, you're less likely to have an insights leader yourself to protect that time.
Well, sure. Yeah, just 2 seconds. And just making sure my ears are on. They're running out of battery, so.
Sure.
Okay. Sorry, you were saying?
Yeah, so just, it kind of leads in pretty neatly into, it is something that I think, I don't think I made the most of the opportunities that I had when I was younger in my career, especially client side, I did go to a lot of events and conferences, but I think I was there for the joy of getting out of the office and obviously the learning around methodologies and stuff. But I think what I didn't now in hindsight, what I wish I had used the opportunities more for was networking and, quite seriously understanding, especially with vendors, like who is out there, what are the capabilities, what's possible. Because I think when you're and maybe it's not just client side, maybe it doesn't matter which side you work on, but overall it is very difficult to keep up with what is possible. What actually exists out there today that is an option methodologically, technologically, etc. And I think the only time client side, unless you're really like making the most of these events and interrogating everyone you meet about what it is that their company does, the only opportunity that you have to really learn that without extensive desktop research is RFPs and pitching and getting vendors to come in and pitch. But again, how do you shortlist the right ones to come in and pitch? You might be missing, the golden one that has a capability that no one else does. And so, yes, I think it is, it's an important investment, time investment to stay up to date and be out there in the industry, because that's the only way that you're going to know, what the best options are for what your business needs.
That's true. And you have also, if you're always on the pulse, you'll understand what's smoke and mirrors and what's not as well.
Exactly.
So if you were to come to it fresh and you go to a conference for the first time in, say, 10 years, you're blown away by the stuff that you're seeing out there. But then how much of it is actually doable right now? And that's always an interesting thing to ask.
Exactly. And I think I've been around long enough that I know the things that have been around a long time. And when they're, repackaged and given a sexy new name, and it's not a new capability. It's just there's been quite a few situations where I've had a pitch from a vendor that I maybe hadn't heard of before. But the minute they go into deep methodology stuff, I'm like, gosh, someone here definitely worked for this other company, because it's almost a complete replica, just called something different and the visuals have changed. So yeah, I think with experience that definitely comes, and it's an important skill to have, because I'm in a new role now, and there are a few things that I think folks here internally who maybe don't have as much of an insights background don't know have existed for a long time and aren't particularly groundbreaking. And it has certainly been sold in that way internally. So you're absolutely right. It's good to know when it's smoke and mirrors.
Now, I was also interested, you were talking about your things you wish you had have done earlier on in your career.
Yeah.
Have you begun to start encouraging your team to do some of those things and maybe set up a little bit of a process for them going out and then reporting back?
The short answer is no, but it's more of a not yet. So as I said, I'm very new in role. I've been, it's 2 months, and the first 2 months are just kind of getting the lay of the land and also building the team. So we're recruiting and we're building the team and restructuring the team. But eventually, yes. So once we are sort of established on our basic foundational ways of working and the roadblocks are in place, that's absolutely something that I want to start doing. And yes, like dividing and conquering, because we can't all be at all the things. It's a tricky one, because I think our biggest limitation will be budget, travel budget, and obviously tickets. And so, and I'm just being extremely frank here, like the logistics of it are things that we would need to think about. It would be a trade-off between someone getting a training in something specific that they actually need to upskill in, or going to a conference. And so, and I think the travel is probably the bigger barrier, more than tickets. So yes, but whatever is possible logistically, I do want to do something where we can divide and conquer a little bit, just because, yes, from my own experience, I know the importance of just getting out there, especially to things that are more trade show in nature and less educational, like less case studies in nature. I know that sounds a little bit crazy. I think the case studies are all well and good and inspiring, but I think the trade show in nature stuff is where you can see what's possible, like what technology exists.
It's an interesting point, because you normally assume that it's the other way around, don't you? You go and talk about what you've done.
the case study stuff is more interesting. Like it's more for nerdy, and we love that. Like, so I think our natural inclination is that. But at the end of the day, if I had my team come back to me and tell me about what they learned, what I would be more interested in is less, a methodology that I, to be honest, probably already knew about, especially with this level of seniority. I'd be more interested in, there is a new tech capability, there is a new way of getting insights quicker, more cost effectively, with a better audience. I think that would perk my ears up, and that's the kind of thing that we would say, right, well, we need that.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess the other point on the fact you wish you had have known earlier in your career, around, yeah, where you can go to get particular information, etc. Do you think that's something that was as limited to you in your scenario, or do you think it is a bit more further afield in the industry?
In terms of feeling like you don't have access to what you need to know,
Yes, that's right.
I imagine so. Just because I jumped around quite a bit in my career, so I'm on my third client side role, and I feel the same in all of them, and so and I think I have, I've just come from Starbucks, where we were quite a significantly sized insights team, especially the research team. There was a fair few of us. And even then, it was still just a constant challenge to make the time to do this, to get the sign off you need internally to go to things, the budgets that you need to go to things. And then when you do go to things, to sift through all the content to find the stuff that is actually interesting enough to take back to your team and say, hey, look, I learned about this, we need to know about this. So no, it is difficult. There are very few, as far as I'm aware, and I would love to be proven wrong on this, but as far as I'm aware, there is very few independent synthesis of genuinely new capabilities that are not smoke and mirrors. Like they are things that we would need to know about in the industry.
Mm. And they don't necessarily have to be new either. It could
Or
just be
yeah.
existing out there, and you may not have come across it, or you may have heard about it, but never actually like dug deeper into what it does or who it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of it is so category specific. So, when I was in Starbucks, for example, I started on the retail side of the business, so our store side of the business, and the type of insights work that you're doing for a retail experience is very different from a CPG experience. Halfway through my Starbucks career, I moved to the CPG side of the business, and suddenly became aware of all of these vendors and insights capabilities that I didn't know existed, because they're very CPG focused. So, things like creating virtual shelves and all of the cool biometric things that we can do now with online surveys. It's very targeted to CPG. So it does totally depend, I think, what category you're in as well. And I think it's great that there are vendors that are specializing in tools that a specific category needs. I'm now in audio tech, and I don't know about anything in particular for audio tech, but if there was, like, that is the kind of thing that I would say, yes, I'm definitely interested. That is slam dunk what kind of tool we would need in this particular category.
I hear you on that one. So bridging both the market research and the technology sectors, at Infotools, we're mindful of and are generally more open to using emerging technology to help us in our roles. So what trial and error have you gone through that has made you a better market researcher as far as technology usage is concerned?
Oh, so at one point in my career, I actually set up my own business. So I had, definitely, it wasn't a one-man show, and had a lot of support, but we were starting from scratch completely, and we were in a region that was very underdeveloped. We were in the Middle East. We were very underdeveloped in terms of what was naturally available. Like, it's not like it being in London, where you have access to all the infrastructure and all the things. There was a lot of problems that we faced around data quality, and we had a real challenge of how do we like guarantee that the research that we're doing, the fieldwork that we're doing is real. And it was just through research of what tools exist that I came across. I don't even know if they exist anymore. I haven't thought about them in many years, but they were a company called DoBlue. And they were for when you do face-to-face interviews via, so like Catty on a tablet. And they could audio record spontaneous parts of the interview, no PII, but it would just be for a short snippet, just to evidence that the interview took place. It was a genuine customer. They were genuinely asking the questions, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, through that very small thing that I would have never have known existed unless I spend a lot of time desk researching. I was like, there must be something that I can do to guarantee quality. And, you know, it was really good for business because we were the only company that was using that technology that could then say to our clients, hey, we can prove, you know, we know there's data quality issues in this region. We can prove that this interview actually happened, that this is genuine. So I think when I've leaned in and tried to solve a very specific problem using technology and tools, I learned, like in that example, I learned so much. But I think that's my point. You really need to lean in. So now in my current role, I'm thinking about what insights infrastructure we need. You know, budgets are tight. I think budgets are tight everywhere right now. Like we are in a recessionary period and everyone is feeling the pinch. We need tools that are more cost effective, quicker, you know, more, I think the level of sophistication that's expected from deliverables as well in terms of how professional they look. The bar has also been raised. And it is very difficult to dedicate huge amounts of time to the desk research. And that's where I think there is just a gap in having a proactive, you know, a proactive feed of things that are available. And this is where I now regret not using my junior years in a way that kind of connected me more in the industry and put me in touch with people that I could, you know, rely on as go-tos. Like, hey, do you know anything about this? And don't get me wrong, there are some wonderful people in my network and I do lean on them extremely heavily. But they're few and far between. And in the interest of not bothering the same 5 to 10 people all the time, it would be great if there was an easier way to find out about this stuff.
In a way that doesn't expose you to getting blasted from everyone.
Exactly. In a way that is genuine and exactly like you have to be smart to see through. I mean, I've worked agency side and client side now, so I know that usually the salesperson, especially at larger vendors, they're not the insight team, they're not the researchers, like they are trained sales professionals. And so it's very difficult because you're not talking to someone who's actually in the same industry as you technically. It becomes more and more difficult to see through smoke and mirrors, and you have to really, you know, ask a lot of probing questions and look under the hood.
I think you talk yourself down a little bit in terms of your career focus, let's say, because technology is one thing, but then there's actually doing the work and what I like to call the fundamentals of market research. So you're focused on them and like getting to know your craft really well. Technology there, if it's done well, it will be invisible and it can just go work behind the scenes and help you with what you're doing. But you need to know what you're doing first in order for the technology to be able to come in and help. So in many senses, you've done a really wise thing as well. So
yeah, thank you. But yes, you're absolutely right. You need to know what you're doing. So I mean, even now in this particular role, we're a luxury brand. It's my first time in the luxury brand space. And again, it's different, you know. Our consumers are not going to be on traditional panels. They're not going to respond to traditional research methods in the same way because it's a very different audience. And so I feel in some ways like I'm fresh on the industry again, like, okay, right, I need to find what works for this consumer from a research methodology tool, and then the tech tools that I would add onto it to make my life easier, to keep things cost effective and quick, etc.
I know, just on that point, I know someone who owns Well, someone who's in a similar position as your clientele, and you think about the kind of salaries and hourly rates that they would charge, and for you to go in and ask them to do a 2 hour survey or a 1 hour survey or even half an hour, that's a big chunk of their time. So it has to be really valuable and a worthy experience to be able to lean in on that. So it's a good challenge to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And now I'm going to eat my words a little bit because there was a conference I did go to when I was very, very early in career. I mean, we're talking more than 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago now. And it was like a, sort of general market research conference, no particular theme. And there was somebody from, I don't know if they were agency or client side, but from American Express, from the Black Card, talking about research that they did with their Black Card customers, which again are like the creme de la creme, and they talked about how they had to do like, it was a boardroom style meeting, and it was very different from the classic focus groups that were big at the time. And at the time, again, I only probably had half an ear on it because it wasn't really relevant to the work that I was doing. But now it's 15 years later, and I'm remembering that one case study. So actually, there is obviously value in the case studies as well. And but I think even in that example, it was less about sexy tools and more just very logistical. Like, how do we do research with specific audiences? I think sometimes the logistics honestly is the biggest question mark. Like, how are we going to actually do this? And then part two is, okay, now sexy tools and cool analytics and nice visualizations, like that's the cherry on top.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I've even heard of some people using influencers, and they come in all different shapes and sizes, but to actually ask a question like once every while to their following, and over time you get a really nice big bank of data that you can
Yes.
pull through, and that's asking very little of people, but over a longer time, which is an interesting approach.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's so many sort of ideas you're sparking in my head now with this conversation. But I think also the other thing that is just a huge opportunity that I think still remains pretty untapped is the merging of research and the market research industry with the data industry. Um, Especially when you go client side and you gain seniority, you are working much more closely with data teams and with internal data. And the sweet spot now, if I was to get a tech capability recommendation or whatever recommendation, would be something that blends both of those. I think that the research industry has, for several years now, been thinking about how we can get smarter and we can avoid asking the survey questions where we already know the answer through our data. But I think there's an opportunity to take that to the next level now and think about research and internal data as one data set and having tools that can blend both of these for connected learnings and deeper insights, that gives you the why from the research, but then the what from your big data that you already have. And I think, I don't know if it's the same today because I'm at a different stage in my career, but when I first started in market research, there was a real push to specialize either in qual or quant, and to specialize in category and specialize as many ways as you can. But actually, I think the best thing that I ever did was to stay generalist. I sort of went out of my way to stay generalist because I couldn't pick my favorite. It was too hard.
Yeah.
If I worked on quant, I'd miss qual. If I worked on qual, I'd miss quant. And if I worked on one category, I'd miss the others. And I think it really was the best thing I ever did, to maintain a curiosity on analytics, even if you're at an agency side. We have, it's usually separated, the researchers and the analysts, and they're separate. But I think the best thing you can do is both of those people lean into each other and learn as much as you can about the other person's job. Because at the end of the day, it's all the same thing. Like, it's all insights. So yeah, that would be another just huge piece of advice that I'd have. Like, insights is everything, even the parts that you might not enjoy. I think there's, some people are scared of numbers and math. I'm terrible in math. But it was a real benefit that I maintained that curiosity of everybody in even the fieldwork team, like everybody's role in making insights happen.
Mm. No, you've a perfect segue to this next question. So some people have very strong preferences for or perceptions of various research methodologies that can be used to bring about greater understanding of consumers. So they're all leading towards the same thing. Are there any perceptions of methodologies that you can think of that just aren't helpful? And are some people missing out on the potential because of things you now know?
Oh gosh. I mean, yes, the answer is yes, absolutely, but it's controversial. Um, I genuinely think that almost every off-the-shelf methodology is in some ways unhelpful. I think the best time to lean into an off-the-shelf methodology is when you need benchmarks and norms, right? That would be the number one reason to do it, right? I need it to be a very specific thing so that I can compare without spending lots of money with other brands who also use that specific thing to create your benchmark. But even when we're doing that, the need for flexibility is just so powerful because internally, we're also trying to get all of our internal work to connect and be consistent. So when there are questionnaires that are fixed, I mean, it just can't work. It just can't. Um, we're trying to squeeze as much juice as we can out of every single project and every single thing that we do, especially today when budgets are so tight. And we can only connect our big picture internal story if there is a level, any degree of flex and give in questionnaires. Um, the other risk that you have with like IP type methodologies, and honestly, like again, this might be controversial. I just really don't believe in IP type methodologies. I believe in IP tech and tech capabilities, but not methodologies, especially because once you look at them, so many IP style methodologies, especially on things like trackers, it's the same. You've just called the KPI something else. You know, you've done something that anybody could do if they just thought to do it. Whereas I think with tech capability, it's very different. You know, you've actually built something that hasn't existed before or improved it. But you can get, if you get locked into an IP methodology, say on a tracker or a longitudinal piece of work, you're stuck. And if you ever wanted to, you know, if your business evolved, you know, your study can't evolve with it because you're stuck with a methodology. You can't migrate to new or different vendors to suit whatever new or different needs you might have. And then you get into a really painful cost heavy exercise of parallel runs and transposing data and trying to somehow make two things match that really don't match. So yeah, I think I really am so much more in the camp of even for trackers, I will really love, you know, the 1 to 5 KPIs that are going to give us benchmarks, and then the rest of the thing. And when I say KPIs, you know, it's your wording and your general methodology so that it's consistent. But everything else, we try to design the research, the methodology in-house as much as we can, so that our in-house bespoke design is the one thing that's consistent across all of our studies. The way that we're like just the individual code answers in our questions, you know, they all add up so that if we want to bring the data together, we can.
And has that been something that you've carried through from Starbucks, etc., into here as well, or is this a bit more of a newer focus for what you're trying to set up at B&O?
No, I think I yes, absolutely carried that through. I think that you know, I really learned a lot from my time in Starbucks. The research minds that worked there were among the best I've ever come across in my career. And they were not afraid to develop internal methodologies, to write, you know, new methodologies and do their own heavy lifting on research design, and then find the best fit vendor that could execute that vision. And then we think about norms where we need norms in certain cases. And I think that honestly, now that I reflect on it, I think that's the point of internal research teams. I think that's the difference between a brand that outsources research and somebody project manages the project, you know, and you have a vendor do all the thinking and all the lifting. That's project management. And I think the role of an internal insight team is not to project manage a vendor, but it's to do the same role that the vendor does. And then you need help with the heavy lifting. So the field work, the tech capabilities, the visualization tools, that's the bit that you need help with just because of resourcing.
Absolutely. I mean, you're the one that knows your business, your clients, your market the best. So you want to make sure you can take that and then help that to, I guess, wrap around and fuel, I guess, all of the work that you're doing as well. Because if you're too focused on the actual doing, then you're missing out on a lot of value that you've got in here, but just can't access it.
Exactly. And no one will ever know the customer, unless I was so scared to go from agency side to client side. I was so nervous about it because I remember thinking, God, won't it be boring to just work on one thing all the time? And actually what happened was it just unlocked a level of intimacy with your category, your industry and your customer that would have been, it's completely impossible. Like you can't, unless, you spend years on the same client and the same tracker, and you're one of those, like, we're an extension of the team. Unless you're in those kind of situation, you just can't have the level of intimacy. And the level of intimacy with what your stakeholders actually need, with what the business is trying to achieve. So, and that's why I think companies hire internal researchers. And then that's where I am now. And now I'm like, right, what tools, tech capabilities are going to make my life easier so that I can do more work with the same resource that I have available?
Yes, I had a similar experience. I used to work in advertising at an agency, and then I went client side into marketing role. And I love being able to get so much closer to our customers, but even into any transactional data and first party data that you had as well. So you've got access to all of that there, and you just see a much bigger picture, I guess, that can influence what you're doing.
Yeah. I really think that, as far as I'm aware, and again, I have huge knowledge gaps about what's possible in the market. And, going back to why I'm even on this podcast in the first place, it's because I know there's a lot that I don't know about what's possible in our industry. But as far as I've seen, I think the CX part of this industry has come the closest to being really holistic in terms of market research, tech capability, and big data connections, and having solutions that straddle all of those things for connected insights. I think, they really set the scene that then internally I look at that and go, right, well, how can I do the same on my brand work? And how can I do the same on, segmentations and make it as equally connected across all of these things?
Mm. So we're still in an interesting space. So I'll keep pushing. What do
Yep.
you wish you had have known while you're working for an agency that you now know after working client side?
What do I wish I had known that I know
Yes.
today when I
Yes.
was at an agency? Um, oh, that the best like value add you can do for a client is desk research, is secondary research, and is bringing, if you've worked on a couple of projects in the same industry or in the same category, you don't have to share data, because obviously that would be illegal, but you can share expertise. And it's that kind of expertise, or maybe you have access to subscriptions, or maybe you go to conferences and you've heard things, bringing things outside of a project into the project. That is such amazing added value. Small things like if you were doing research during COVID and you're trying to explain what the hell was going on, like that was a big focus over the last couple of years, just generally what is going on in the world and with consumers, because it was unprecedented times. And plotting, Google search data to your research results so that you can use other sources to explain what's going on outside of primary research. And again, I think that comes from just not being afraid of other data, from thinking of research as one of many forms of data. It's so valuable. And the vendors that I love to work with are the ones that are bravest in doing that, and in bringing stuff to a project that I hadn't even thought to mention in the brief. And don't get me wrong, I understand, because I've been on that side of the wall, that it is more work, and thinking outside the box, and sometimes it's difficult to do that if the budget is tight, etc. But in terms of added value, that's the most beautiful thing that can happen.
And who's going to stand out?
Yeah, exactly. It so stands out. And that is the kind of thing that when we receive a report, we usually do, or we try to do. So I'm in the habit of a report that is, considered the final report from the vendor side is actually the first draft from my end. And a lot of additional content gets added to it to really like take that story to the next level. And so any help or support that can come as part of that first draft in doing that, what that means for a client is, wow, this is looking a lot more like a final draft than a first draft, because that's our definition of final, is have we added every possible element to this?
Interesting you say that, because one of the premises of what the founders did at Infotools is they set up to try and include the market researcher in the investigation process. So like a report would basically be that final pit that you're talking about, or maybe more of a final draft, because you've been involved in the analysis from the start. So you'll be able to bring in your expertise. And sometimes it doesn't quite sit well with agencies when you bring in clients early on, because they're not necessarily adding the value that they want to before presenting it. But it's an interesting concept. Like you, as we mentioned, you've got that market knowledge that's so valuable in terms of finding things out, and having someone like yourself as part of that is very important, as we've talked about.
I would also add that the place that this exercise is most valuable is trackers. I think that trackers, it's so easy to become complacent on a tracker, because the risk of a tracker is routine. It becomes routine. And honestly, I think your tracker has failed the moment it becomes routine. That's where there's just such a huge need of, okay, things are moving up and down. The tracker itself can only tell you so much. Actually, trackers are probably the least insightful tool that you can have. It's a monitoring tool. The insight has to come from outside the tracker, where what happened contextually that drove something to move up and down. And I think that's where there's just a huge opportunity to bring in loads more stuff, like look at local news, and especially for global trackers, like really visualize what's happening on the ground to make a tracker insightful to whatever the local context was.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. If we think about the other side of the coin now, what are you most thankful for, knowing, because you worked agency side, that you've been able to put into practice in your corporate work?
Oh, honestly, like I love this question. So I have a rule. I will not hire anyone client side. And I'm probably going to break this rule at some point, because there'll be exceptions. But I certainly go out of my way to not hire anyone client side unless they have agency experience. And again, it is because client side insight teams are not supposed to be project managers. They are supposed to be experts, research experts, and you can't get expertise client side. It's impossible. We're too far removed from the actual doing of the work. And so, yeah, that expertise comes agency side. What do I wish I had known? The most expertise comes from the least sexy part of the job. So it's, really being intimate with DP processes. It's really being very, very comfortable getting dirty in data. It's understanding the logistics and complexities and legalities of fieldwork in different markets, among different audiences. These are all things that I think, as researchers, we kind of get our high on the storytelling. And don't get me wrong, the storytelling is so important, of course, like that, at the end of the day, that is the final deliverable. But the expertise that you gain, that you take with you then to a client-side role, that helps you see through smoke and mirrors and helps you look at a proposal and say, hey, this is missing a whole bunch of stuff that's going to guarantee quality and get us what we need. That comes from the hands-on, as close to the ground as you can get of unsexy parts of the research job. Yeah, I think there's just no way you can get close to it when you're client side and just maximize the opportunity when you're agent side. I think the minute if someone listening to this is new in their career and is currently working agency side, and they find themselves doing something that they think is boring or not fun or like, run of the mill type work, honestly, that's right there. That is the most valuable skill that they're gaining is right there. Yes, the storytelling I would say is the other biggie, but I feel like we already know the storytelling is the biggie and we don't talk enough about the run of the mill work. You're checking data. Like that is such a skill because when you are client side, you will need to check data. I don't think I've ever, and it's not the fault of anyone. It's just that we're all working at a million miles per hour and mistakes happen. And that just is the way of the world. And unless you check, that they're going to be missed. And literally checking tables equipped me with so much, with the ability now to look at, I get all the vendors to send tables and to say, this looks weird, go check. And honestly, like 9 times out of 10, something was wrong.
But we've always done it this way. Like, well,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I hope that brings, I wish I had someone say that to me because there were times in my early stage career, especially when I was on trackers, that it was just like, oh gosh, like this is so dull. Like this isn't the sexy part of the job. But that's the part of the job that like it's equipping you with what you need for when you're leading a team and you need to spot this stuff. At the end of the day, if the quality of the field work is not there, you don't have anything. It doesn't matter how great your story is.
So if you're a market researcher working client side and have never worked in an agency before, would you recommend that they take a sabbatical and go and get some agency experience?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so first of all, it depends where you work.
Yeah.
Some companies, especially CPG companies, are very good at being extremely hands-on. Some companies, they have a Qualtrics subscription or vendor agreement, and they are really doing their own stuff. I think there are exceptions. It depends where you work. If you are young in your career and you are currently client side, and you find that your job is primarily project managing vendors, then yes, I think you can only go so far without having hands-on experience. I would strongly recommend, um, even if you can work with your vendor, and if it depends, how um, permissible they are to this idea, because it is a little bit of babysitting. But yeah, you need to go to like the field briefings, like the briefings of the interviewers, and you need to check links and you need to do the grunt work to really understand like what goes on behind it. It just helps in so many ways. Like even when we're doing costings, now when I set my budget, I often set my budget before I've gone out for an RFP. And the way that I set my budget is just from knowing how much things cost and knowing honestly the number of hours it takes to do, whatever you need to do for this size project versus that size project, or this methodology versus that methodology. The logistics of research will teach you so much.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, very true. So just on a similar hypothetical vein again, what advice would you give yourself if you were to move to a software vendor that serves the market research space?
I mean, this is hard because I've never done that.
Mm.
But I like my first reaction to your question was, I mean, that sounds like it would be a very cool career move. And I think that's actually just made me reflect on the fact that I haven't done that and probably have gaps in what you will learn from doing that. Um, I think I would anticipate that that will teach you so much about what is genuine new capabilities or the room and opportunity and white space territory for new technology development versus what already exists today. And honestly, it's just like 100 different vendors doing exactly the same thing and calling it something different. Being able to learn that is probably going to be a very valuable skill, and to learn what doesn't exist yet so that you can be equipped to champion it or be part of it when it's built.
Mm. It's pretty challenging, I'll tell you, because it's so easy to start your own business these days.
Yeah.
You can set up a website for $200, but you could spend a couple of hours and you've essentially got a customer facing window, if you want to, shop window. And yeah, there's a lot of people all doing the same thing, like you said, calling it different things. But
There
yes,
is. There is, and I think the two areas of research or market research that are most guilty of honestly just more of the same. One is probably tech. I think, especially in like in the space of like communities or now CX tech as well. Like before, there used to be fewer with more diversity, and now there's almost so much choice. And I've yet to find anyone that is like actually particularly different from anyone else. And then so tech, and then the other one is strategic insights agencies. Everyone is a strategic insights agency. Honestly, I would be way more blown away if I got like a pitch or a cold call and someone said, hey, we're not a strategic complex research. That's not what we do. Because you only really need one or two of those as a client. Like you only need to max two really, unless you have huge volumes of work, and then maybe you need four. What there aren't enough of is like it's going to be low cost. It's not going to be it's not going to be you're going to do more of the thinking. It's going to be quick, it's going to be cheap, and it's going to be quality. Like there is so few of that. There's quick, there's cheap, there's loads of those, but quick, cheap, and quality, honestly, I right now I couldn't name a vendor. Quick, cheap, and quality, I couldn't name one.
no. No, so our next campaign is going to be we're basically the same as them.
Yeah. And again, I'm generalizing hugely. Obviously,
No,
there are amazing I don't know how much I can name them or not, but especially in the like CPG space, there are some vendors where there it has to be that vendor. Like there is no they're above and beyond, and their capabilities are amazing. Their tech is amazing, um, and their method, especially anything using biometrics, is you're getting so much more bang for your buck in terms of insights and learnings. Because that's my other thing. I really hate stated research surveys, like like whether it's concept testing or asking about behaviors. I'm so not a fan of asking people what they like and what they don't like and what they did and what they didn't do. Nobody knows. The consumer doesn't know what they want or need or how they think. The most powerful insights come from just observing human behavior, and to do that via quant surveys, I think is a really powerful tool.
yeah. Well, the old think, say, do gaps.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Lastly, and possibly most importantly, what's the one product at B&O that you believe our listeners have to buy?
Oh, I mean, it's an easy answer. It's well, actually, now see, there are a few. I mean, we've just released our new headphones, and I would say you do actually have to buy them. The problem is that you can't because we sold out so quickly. But they'll be back in stock again in the not too distant future, and I highly recommend them. I think the other one that just stands out in my mind, and customer segmentation, it depends what you're into. But if for customers like me that like interesting things and unique designs and products that would make others go wow, we have a product called the Harmony, which is I almost don't want to call it a sound bar because that would be an insult to this product, but technically that is the category that it falls into. It is the most beautiful piece of technology I've ever seen. And it has a beautiful mechanic. It's a moving piece of technology. I mean, obviously, this sounds amazing because it's Bang Olufsen. But yes, for anyone that hasn't heard about the Bang Olufsen Harmony, I think you should definitely check it out.
It looks quite impressive. I have seen it on your website. I haven't seen it in person yet.
Oh, yeah, you need to get down to store and ask for a demo because it is really like it does make you say, wow.
Well, we have a software platform called Harmony, so maybe I need to get some for market research.
Yep, that sounds like a plan.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show today, Stephanie. It's been a really fascinating and in-depth conversation, and you've shared a lot of things in there, so I appreciate that a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm slightly nervous about the LinkedIn inundations I'm going to now get. But no, I think this is really great what you're doing, and I just think, like I said at the beginning, I didn't even know there were dedicated podcasts that are just for the insights industry. There used to be magazines, but that's kind of out of favor now. And anything like this that synthesizes in a kind of an independent way what's happening in the industry is so powerful. So I am excited to become a listener now. Thank you.
You're quite welcome. So thank you also to those who have listened in today as well. If you have liked what you've heard, feel free to share this podcast with others, subscribe to the podcast, and also leave a review if you have the time. We'd be very grateful. Thank you, and thank you for listening to Now That's Significant.